Hello, and welcome to the official podcast of CallUponTheLord.com. My name's Corey Wigington, and this is episode 8. This week we are on week 8 of the Great Story. We are dealing with the Judges this week, so it should be an interesting time. Today is also December the 20th, so just 5 days before Christmas. So Merry Christmas, and I hope you're having a good Christmas season. So good time to worship the Lord, to spend time with friends and family, and remember the true reason for the season. So we've had a short break here, actually a little bit longer than a short break. I'd gone on a trip down to Tulsa, Oklahoma to attend a seminary course, and I've got kind of a little sidetracked on my podcast here, so I do apologize for that. I'm a couple weeks behind of where I want to be at this point, so over the next few days, or a couple weeks I guess, I'm going to try to catch up and get back on track here. So I do thank you for your patience. Please bear with me, and let's go ahead and get started this week. So this week I thought it'd be good to start off with good practices, I guess, for biblical interpretation. Things that we can do to get the most out of the text. A lot of times people will just read the Bible, and which is good. I mean, you get a lot out of reading the Bible. The Bible's one of those things that's good on many different levels. You can read it just start in one section, end in another section, and get a lot of truth out of that. There's a lot of just surface truth that you can glean from the Bible just by reading it. But as we start getting in a little bit deeper into it, more truths are revealed and greater truths are revealed. The Bible never contradicts itself. It's just the more you study it, the more you realize how much truth is actually there. So I'm going to give you a few tips on better ways to study the Bible so that you can experience that as well. The first tip I have down here is repetition. The Bible is very good about repeating themes and repeating just phrases in general. When we see repetition in the Bible, we need to think, this is important. They wouldn't have said it more than one time if it wasn't important. One of my Bible professors was just illustrating the point of how little space that they actually had to record the biblical text into. I mean, a scroll was only so large. You couldn't add another page to a scroll. I mean, it rolled out, it was a certain length, and that was it. So the information that was recorded in those scrolls, every word of it was vitally important, that it had the right meaning, and that they didn't overemphasize a point that wasn't unnecessary. So when we see repetition in there over and over and over again, where the Holy Spirit had led someone to write that, we need to think, they wouldn't have repeated that unless it was really important. So as you're reading along in the text, as you're seeing repeated phrases, repeated themes, try to think about, why is that in there, and what application does it hold for me? Second thing I wanted to point out was what is said at the beginning of a book and what is said at the end of a book is very important. The beginning and the end, it's just like any other story. The beginning sets up the, what's actually happening, kind of sets up the theme, or tells you what the book is about. Whereas the end of the book tells you the conclusion of, this is where we have ended up. So the end of the book, that's actually one of the things that we're going to talk about here in Judges, how the book ended, ends up being a very important thing that you can very easily just read over. So as you're reading through the different books in the Bible, keep in mind the beginning of the book and the end of the book, very important. Of course, the information in the middle is also important, but the wrappers is something you need to kind of keep in mind and examine. Also, to kind of go along with that, the first words a person speaks and the last words a person speaks are generally important as well. First words tend to establish the character of a person, and then the last words, kind of how they ended up. Similar to the way, beginning of the book, end of the book. And the last thing here that I wanted to kind of point out is modern translations of the Bible break up the biblical text into verses, chapters, and then, of course, sections within those chapters, and then you have the full biblical book. The books of the Bible weren't really recorded that way. They're broken up that way for us because it's easier for reference. I mean, if you say to somebody, go find John 3:16, in every Bible that you pick up, you'll be able to turn to John 3:16, and it will be pretty much the same verse, minus, of course, the differences in the translation. I mean, it is the same verse. And it's not the same way as we look at some of the original manuscripts or the copies of those original manuscripts that we have. They weren't broken up into chapters and verses like that. So a lot of times what we get into the habit of doing is quote mining the Bible. We'll read a verse and say, oh, well, that verse in the Bible says, this, and we'll draw a theology from that. The problem with that, of course, is that we are taking that verse out of context. And when we don't look at the entire context of what was said, why was that put there, and who was that addressing, we run into difficulties with our theology. So when we are reading the books of the Bible, we need to keep in mind that they weren't originally broken up like that. So when you read, you really need to read a whole book at a time to figure out what is the book about, who was it talking to, why is this particular thing being addressed. It's more than just this verse says this. It's why did it say that? What was it in response to? It helps you glean a little bit more of more substance from a verse, and it helps you avoid some of our more problem theologies that people have come up with, because now we understand the full context of what it's in. So I encourage you, as you're reading and trying to study, don't just read this chapter and part of this chapter to here. Read the entire book, get a full idea of what's going on. I know I have a book, it's by John MacArthur. It's called, I can't remember, it's like How to Read the Bible Effectively or something like that. And one of the things that he recommends in there is, if you really want to study a book, you take the book and you read it one time every day for 30 days. So as you read it to begin with, you kind of get the idea of what's going on, obviously. First couple times you read it, you're getting really familiar with the story. By midway point in the month, you're really starting to see, get a little bit more of an idea. Because, that's starting to get ingrained in your head. You know what the Bible text says now. Now you're starting to think about a little bit more of how it relates to everything else. And then by the end of the month, of course, you are very, very familiar with that text. And you don't just know this one little section, you know the entire book. If somebody asks you what's in 2 Timothy 3, you can talk about how it's talking about elders and deacons and how they're to behave and such. You just know these things. So that's one of the things I encourage you to do, is read a full book at a time. Don't just read a little section. If you're going to study the Bible and learn what it says. So those are just some tips there, but before we get started, of course, in Judges. But it's something to keep in mind as we examine the book of Judges. Now, about the Judges. Judges, chronologically, takes place right after the death of Joshua. Of course, Moses led the children of Israel out of Egypt. And then when Moses died, Joshua took over, and Joshua actually led the children of Israel into the Promised Land and began the conquest of the land that the Lord had promised them. And at the close of the book of Joshua, it talks about how the children of Israel, they were obedient to the Lord through all the days of the life of Joshua. They did what was right in the sight of God. Of course, after Joshua died, there really wasn't another leader that unified all the tribes. The tribes kind of went off and did their own thing, and they were disobedient to God. They didn't do the things that God told them that they needed to do. And as a result, once we see this disobedience, other things happen here. There's a cycle, and I think we've talked about this before, but it's really evident in this part of the text. In the book of Judges, we see the cycle over and over again. It's a cycle of disobedience. So what I want to read for you here, I want to read Judges 11 through 19. And we'll just see how Israel was disobedient here. So it says, "And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and served the Baals. And they abandoned the Lord and the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after the other gods from among the gods of the people who were around them, and bowed down to them. And they provoked the Lord to anger. They abandoned the Lord and served the Baals and Ashtaroth. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he gave them over to plunderers who plundered them. And he sold them into the hand of their surrounding enemies, so that they would no longer withstand their enemies. Whenever they marched out, the hand of the Lord was against them for harm, as the Lord had warned, and the Lord had sworn to them, and they were in terrible distress." Then the Lord raised up judges, who saved them out of the hands of those who plundered them. Yet they did not listen to their judges, for they whored after the gods and bowed down before them. They soon turned aside from the way in which their fathers had walked, who had obeyed the commandments of the Lord, and they did not do so. Whenever the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge, and he saved them from the hand of the enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning, because of those who afflicted and oppressed them. But whenever the judge died, they turned back, and more corrupt than their fathers, going after other gods, serving them and bowing down to them. They did not drop any of their practices or their stubborn ways. So what we see here, we have this cycle here of, first off, they had disobedience. We see that in Judges 2:11. What were they doing? They were worshiping other gods. They had failed to take the land that the Lord had promised them. They kind of got out there, they took some of the land, but they made treaties with the surrounding nations. They didn't destroy the nations like they were supposed to. Instead, they were content with the little pittance that they did have, and it caused them a lot of problems. The Lord told them, go into the land, destroy everybody there, take it over, I am your God. Instead, what did they do? They went in, they made treaties, they decided not to do what the Lord had told them, and as a result, they began to turn against God, serve other gods, and problems, of course, arose. One of the things here that it does say is, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. That is a repeating theme through the book of Judges. Now, I just told you earlier in this podcast, repeating themes are very important. If something is repeated over and over and over again, we need to decide, why was that repeated? And why is that important? Well, what we see here is, it says, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. That's the cause of all of their problems. Had they not done evil in the sight of the Lord, none of this would even have been an issue, because there wouldn't have been any reason for God to have turned them over to the hands of their enemies. But we continue on with the cycle. What we have disobedience to begin with, and then the Lord punishes them. The Lord says, fine, if you're going to serve other gods, if you're going to not do what I commanded you to do, if you're not going to upkeep your side of the covenant, then I'm not going to fulfill my side of the covenant. So he gives them over to the hands of their enemies, and they are attacked, and they are oppressed, and they are made slaves, and they're basically punished until they figure out, we maybe should have not turned against God. Maybe God is punishing us. So at that point, what we have is repentance. And we see that, of course, in Judges 2:18. Israel calls out for deliverance. The Lord hears their groanings and raises up a judge for them. And that brings us to our last point here, is God then delivers his people. We see that in Judges 2:16, where God raises up a judge to bring deliverance, to save his people. So, judges were appointed from time to time in this period. A judge was either a military leader or a civil leader, just depended on what was required at that time. Now, the book of Judges mentions 13 judges that were raised up. I will tell you their names if you don't hold me to the pronunciations. It lists Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, Abimelech, Tola, Jair, Japhath, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, and Samson. Now, 2 other judges are mentioned, with the possibility of 2 more on top of that. We have Eli and Samuel. Those are mentioned actually in the book of 1 Samuel. They're not mentioned in the book of Judges. Eli, of course, was a high priest. His sons are the 2 other people that were possibly mentioned as judges. Samuel, of course, was the prophet of God. He too was the high priest. He was the one that actually appointed King Saul, or anointed King Saul as the king of Israel, despite his warnings of what happens when you appoint a king. So, judges, by their very nature, were the deliverers. When the Lord appointed a judge, he was actually with that judge to do whatever he had appointed them to do. In some cases, it was a military victory. In some places, it was just giving wisdom and advice and kind of providing some leadership to the people. Now, the thing about the judges, and this book in particular, is they weren't always the highest character of people. And that seems a little odd, because God raises them up and appoints them to a certain task, and he is with them. But again, there are some difficulties. They're not always the best quality people. We'll talk about this later. Samson, of course, he had a fierce anger about him. He killed a lot of people. He was marrying wives that were Philistine women, and I mean, he was not exactly the paragon of purity that you would expect out of someone appointed by God. But God used him as a judge. So I guess, it goes to show that none of us are perfect, but God can still use us if we have faith in him. And we'll see how Samson's faith was challenged and restored. So the time period of the judges, of course, like I said earlier, spanned from the death of Joshua to the appointment of Saul. Now we know that the time of Abraham was about 2000 BC, and the time of Saul was about 1000 BC. So we have a 1,000-year period in there where the period judges can, the era of the judges can be. Of course, we had Moses, we had the captivity, had some time period there, so that advances us forward. The best biblical scholarship would put the era of the judges at about 1450 BC to 1000 BC, about a 400 to 450 year time period. There are other scholars that will put a few different dates on it, given certain historical finds. That could be accurate, could not be. The biblical scholarship that we're going with here says 1450 to 1000. That's just good to keep in your head. So, we're not going to talk about all the judges. They all did different things. Of course, the book of Judges describes what they all did. Some of them were just raised to power to kill a certain king. Others provide, like I said, wisdom. Others were more of military campaign leaders. There are several weird details about certain judges. That I think the first one that's described talks about a guy stabbing a fat king in his gut, and the sword's actually swallowed up in his gut because he's so large, and he was stabbed while he was relieving himself, which is another great picture. But we're not going to cover all of those because, well, this is the story. We're trying to get kind of more of an overview with a little bit of theology thrown in here. So I think we're going to cover Deborah, Gideon, and Samson as our three judges. Those are probably the three most talked about judges, the most famous judges as they were. So Deborah, she's discussed in Judges 4 and 5. Deborah, of course, is a woman. She is a prophetess. She was raised up as a judge. Said she provided wisdom to the people. She was not a military leader. But during the time of Deborah, the land of Israel was under a military siege. It says the King Jabin was oppressing the people of Israel. It said he had 900 iron chariots. And the Lord had commanded Israel to go, take 10,000 men and go deal with him. But Israel hadn't listened to him. So we'll pick up this story in Judges 4, 6, and 7. Okay. And we read, she, when that's referring to Deborah, sit and summoned Barak, the son of Abnion, from Kadesh Naphtali, and said to him, has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you, go gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali and the people of Zebulun? And I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon, with his chariots and his troops, and I will give them into your hand. Okay, so here what we see is Deborah has summoned Barak and is basically chastising him for his cowardice. Says, you basically have not listened to what the commands of God were. He told you, go kill those people. You have not done it. Why have you not done it? So we continue on with the reading here in verses 8 through 9. It says, Barak said to her, if you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. And she said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory. For the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. Okay, so the Lord commanded Barak to go take care of this general Sisera, and he had not heeded the commands of the Lord. Deborah summons him, chastises him, says, you need to go do this. And even still, after Deborah had told him that he needed to go do this, he doesn't think that he needs to. Rather, he's not willing to go do it himself. He says, well, if you'll go with me, then I'll do it. Of course, he's kind of displaying his cowardice here. So Deborah says, okay, I will go with you, but because of that, the victory will not be yours. The victory will be the Lord's, and he will deliver this general into the hands of a woman, not you. So what happens? Deborah agrees to go with him. In Judges 4:14, they're camped, of course, next to the Sisera's army, and Deborah says, arise, and go out, and says, go out and strike Sisera, kill this commander. The Lord has commanded it. And in Judges 4:15, it starts off and says, the Lord routed. So again, we see where the Lord is fighting Israel's battles for them. It wasn't the might of Barak's 10,000 men that was able to defeat this army. Instead, it was the Lord who was able to empower them to do so. So, the army was defeated, but the commander fled. And it says he fled to the tent of Jael, who was an ally of his. She invites him in for water and shelter and stuff. It's basically offering to protect him. So he does. He goes in and he falls asleep, it says. And this woman, Jael, takes a hammer and a tent spike and drives it through his head and into the ground. So with quite a lot of force, she's driving this tent spike into his skull, through his temple, and he is dead. Quite dead. So again, what we see here is God has delivered this Sisera, this commander of the armies, delivered him to a woman instead of the military leader of Israel. And it was all because he didn't listen to the Lord when the Lord told him to go. So, Judges 4:23 wraps this story up quite appropriately, and it says, "It was God who subdued Jabin, because he defeated Sisera, his general." Moving on, we have Gideon. Gideon is described in Judges 6-8. Now, Gideon has some faith problems. Of course, the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon and was basically calling him to service. This is actually quite a cool thing, because this is one of our pre-incarnate Christophanies. This is a physical appearance of Christ in the Old Testament. Of course, the way we know that is, at least one of the ways, is Gideon offers a sacrifice to this being. If it had been just a normal angel, an angel would have said, no, you don't sacrifice to me, you don't worship me, you only worship God. Instead, what we see here is, in part of Gideon's faith problems, he first says, all right, if you're really the Lord, stay here while I go back and get a sacrifice. He goes back to his tent, gets a sacrifice, prepares it. The angel stretches out his staff and consumes the sacrifice, basically accepting his sacrifice. So we see that this is, the angel of the Lord. This is the Lord. This is Christ incarnate in the Old Testament. So, another one of his problems, of course, happens in Judges 6:36-40, where he's still asking for a sign from God. He's asking him, do you really want me to go out and do this and destroy these armies and such? I mean, do you really want me to just tell you what I'm going to do? I'm going to take this fleece here, I'm going to lay it on the ground. And tomorrow morning when I come out, if there is dew on the fleece and none on the ground around it, I'll take that as a sign that, yes, this is what you want me to do. Of course, he goes out, lays out the fleece, comes back the next morning, fleece is all wet, ground around is completely dry. That's not good enough for Gideon. Gideon's like, well, tell you what, that could have been just a fluke. So what we're going to do is, tonight I'm going to lay this fleece out, and tomorrow when I come back, if the fleece is dry and the ground around it is wet, then I'll take that as a sign. Well, he goes and he does that. Of course, next morning comes out, fleece is dry, ground around is completely soaked. So he finally figures out, okay, the Lord wants me to do this. First thing he does, of course, the Lord commands him, go destroy the altars of Baal. Well, he was afraid of his father's men, so instead of just going out and destroying those altars, he ends up going at night to do it in the cover of darkness, so no one sees him. He wasn't allowing the Lord basically to protect him. He was trying to hide and take care of himself. Of course, he went ahead. He did destroy the altars. The men were told that he did it. They came against him, and he received a nickname here, Jerubbaal, which means let Baal contend. So basically, if Baal is a god, let him deal with me. Of course, Baal was not a god. Baal was nothing, just a figment of their imagination, and he was under God's protection, so nothing happened to Gideon. So Gideon, he had an army that gathered around him of 32,000 men, and he was told to go attack the Midianites. But the Lord said, you know what, 32,000 men, that is too many men. What I want you to do is get rid of some of those. So go ahead, go out, and in Judges 7:3, he says, go out, announce to the men, say, anybody that's afraid, just going home. Just leave. You don't have to stay. Just go home. Well, he went out and did that. Of course, 32,000 men, that was a decent amount of men, but they were probably still outnumbered. And he told everybody that was afraid to go home. 22,000 men left out of 32,000. That means he has 10,000 men left. You got to be wondering what these 10,000 men are thinking. It's like if they were concerned about 32,000 men actually being able to have victory here, now you're down 20,000 men. It's a little bit more frightening. But God said, no, 10,000 men, you might still be able to claim that Israel had this victory, and it wasn't God that did that. So I want you to reduce that even more. Take the men down by the water, and this was in Judges 7, 4 through 7. It said, take the men down to the water, and anybody that laps the water up like a dog would, that's the men I want you to keep. So he took all the men down by the water, and he watched them all as they drank. Some men knelt down by the water and got it out with their hands, and other men just stuck their face right in the water and started lapping it up like a dog would. And he picked out those men, and the men that did that were 300 men. And out of 10,000, 9,700 men were sent home, and Gideon and his 300 men were all that remained. Now you got to think these men were probably pretty frightened, given they had 32,000 men. Now they're down to 300 men. That's quite a bit of numbers change, and now they have this huge army in front of them. So in Judges 7:12, it says of the army that they were fighting here, it says, now the Midianites and Amalekites, all the people of the east, were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number, as the sand by the seashore in multitude. Now, of course, it doesn't mean there was actually as many people there as there is sand on a beach. It's a little bit of imagery that we see there of there's a lot of people here. You look out there and it's really more people than you can count. So, yeah, in practical terms, you could count them, but when you're looking at this army, there is a massive amount of people here. And, we see this kind of imagery elsewhere in the Old Testament where it talks about as many, the descendants of Abraham would be like the sand, or sand of the sea, or something like that. I mean, we see that kind of imagery elsewhere. So this really is nothing new, but it gives you the idea of there's a lot of people down there, and Gideon has 300 men. So, what was Gideon commanded to do? It says with trumpet in his right hand and torches in their left hand, they came out, they blew the trumpets, and the men down below turned on themselves and they killed each other. So Gideon's men didn't actually do anything. The Lord delivered the victory to them. So this is just something that God did quite a lot in the Old Testament. He fought the battles for the armies of Israel. When God tells you to do something, you do it, and He will do it for you. That's kind of the message here. Have faith in God, and He will take care of it. So that's what happened here. God won the battle. The victory was His, and everyone knew that God had led them to victory. Of course, after Gideon finished judging Israel, and he did for several years after that, once again we'll read in the text where it says, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. Another repeated phrase in the text, they did evil in the sight of the Lord. Part of that cycle again. They saw God do all these wonderful things. It was great and wonderful, and now it's been a while, and I really haven't seen anything. God really do that? I just don't know. Yeah, we'll go off and do my own thing here. And then, of course, they fall into disobedience again. They start being oppressed, and God raises up other judges. So last judge we're going to talk about here is Samson, probably one of the most famous judges from the Old Testament. Everybody knows the story of Samson. It might give you a little bit more insight here. Now, Samson was a Nazarite, it says, a Nazarite from the womb. We talked about what a Nazarite was in a previous session here. Nazarite was basically someone that was set apart for service for God. Part of being a Nazarite was that you could never cut your hair. That was just a sign of the Nazarite. They had long hair, they never cut it during the entire time of their vow. Of course, Samson was a Nazarite from the time of his birth all the way through. He was a lifetime Nazarite. He wasn't just a certain time to time. He was his entire life. Second part, of course, was that they were not allowed to eat any grapes or drink anything of the vine, so no alcohol or anything. And the third thing was that they were never to come in contact with a dead person. Any of these things would, if they cut their hair, if they drank the vine, it would basically take their vow and reset it, because they had not fulfilled what they wanted to do. Now, with someone that was on like a little, had committed themselves for several years to the Nazarite vow, that would reset their time. Basically, all the time that was before that no longer counted, and they would have to continue on. With Samson, of course, since he was a lifetime Nazarite, there was no resetting of that time. He, had to do whatever cleansing he had to do if he would ever violate any of these things. Of course, he wasn't exactly a paragon of purity like I talked about before. Let's look at Judges 14:6. Is that right? 14:5 and 6. Let's just see a little bit about Samson here. All right. Let's read here. Okay, so talks about Samson's great strength here. That, of course, was his gift from God, was that he had great strength to do what he needed to do. Judges 14:5 says, Then Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah, and they came to the vineyards of Timnah. And behold, a young lion came toward him roaring. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and although he had nothing in his hand, he tore the lion into pieces, as one tears a young goat. But he did not tell his father and mother what he had done. So here we see, the strength of Samson. A lion, king of the jungle, attacks him. What does he do? Nothing in his hands, no weapon or anything, rips it asunder, like you do with a young goat. Now, I've never really done that with a young goat before, but I can assume from the imagery that doing that to a baby goat might be easier than doing that to a lion. So we see here him killing a lion with his bare hands. The Spirit of the Lord did that. It empowered him to do that. So he had great strength to do what the Lord wanted him to do. Problem was, he had issues with Philistine women. He had a taste for Philistine women, and well, what does he do? First thing he does is he goes out and he takes a Philistine wife. Of course, he meets with her family, and one of the things he does is he tells them a riddle. And he says, if you solve my riddle, I'll give you 30 changes of clothing, 30 linen cloth and 30 changes of clothing. And he gives him 7 days to do that. Well, during those 7 days, his wife is pleading with him. It's like, you don't love me. You just don't love me. You've come into my land. You've given this riddle to my family, and you haven't even explained it to me. So you don't love me. Unless you tell me what it is, you don't love me. Well, of course, he finally relents after she complains to him enough, and he tells her, "All right, this is what the riddle means." What does she do? She immediately goes off to her family and tells them, "Oh, this is what Samson's riddle was." She betrays him, and as a result, he has to pay up on his debt. The brothers come and say, "Well, we know what your riddle is." So he tells them, "Okay, fine." He goes off into another city, kills 30 Philistines, strips them of their clothing, brings it back, and gives them their clothes. He has a little bit of a temper, you can see here. So, after that, he leaves for a time, it says, and then when he comes back for his wife, and the father of his wife says, "Well, I thought you hated your wife, so I went ahead and just gave her to somebody else." Well, that's something he probably didn't want to do with Samson, because he had a little bit of a temper. They should have known that from before. So what he did was he caught 300 foxes, it says, and for each pair he tied a torch between their tails and sent them out in the fields. Now, when he returned, it was the time of harvest, so the wheat harvest was in, basically, and he sent the foxes through the wheat fields with torches and torched their entire crop. Philistines weren't happy about this, of course, and they gathered an army together, and they were set off to go find Samson and kill him. Israel, of course, was where Samson lived. So it says 3,000 people of the tribe of Judah went to Samson and said, "You got us in a lot of trouble here. We're going to have to give you over to him." And Samson's like, "Okay, tell you what, just don't promise not to kill me, and you can give them over to give me over to them." So they agree. They end up tying him down to a rock, telling the Philistines, "This is where he is. You take Samson. He's not one of us. Go do what you want to do with Samson." So they did. Philistines went, found Samson. Of course, Samson, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. He had his great strength. He broke his binds, found the jawbone of a donkey, picked it up, and with that killed 1,000 men, it says. 1,000 men he beat to death with the jawbone of a donkey. So, Philistines knew to fear this man. He had a lot of anger and a lot of strength, and they couldn't really do anything with him. Of course, it says after that Samson judged Israel for 20 years. Samson had some problems toward the end of his life, though. He ended up marrying a woman by the name of Delilah, another Philistine woman who with low character, low moral values, and was very loyal to the lords of the Philistines. They came to her and offered her 1,100 pieces of pieces of silver a piece. So each one of them, 1,100 pieces of silver from each one of them, if she could get Samson to tell her what the source of his strength was. Now, I can't imagine why Samson's trusting people at this point. His wife before had basically turned him over to her brothers and basically betrayed him there. But here he goes, he's trusting another Philistine woman, and that's what she tries to do. She tries basically to betray him. So they get together, and she starts after Samson. "Samson, what's the source of your strength? Just tell me the source of your strength." It's like, "Okay, the source of my strength would actually fail away if they would bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings." Okay, so what does she do? She goes tells the leaders that. They provide her with 7 fresh bowstrings. She binds him with it. And then it says a night goes by. Samson falls asleep. Philistines come in. Delilah cries, Samson, Samson, the Philistines are here. Samson just sets up, breaks his binds, goes and deals with the Philistines. And then she starts in, oh, you lied to me. You were able to break your binds. I wasn't the source of your strength. It's like, yeah, I know. Well, you don't love me. If you don't tell me, you don't love me. It's like, all right, fine. So his next thing is, if it's new rope. If you bind me with new rope, that will take away my strength. So she does. She binds him with new rope. Philistines attack. He breaks his binds. Goes out and deals with Philistines. She comes back. You don't love me. You didn't tell me. You lied to me. So he says, fine. If you weave the locks of my hair into the web of a loom, that will take away my strength. She does that, and again the Philistines come and try to attack him, and he is able to fend them off because he still has his strength. Now you wonder here she is. She's betrayed him 3 times. As soon as he tells her what the source of his strength is, she goes out and betrays him. Why is he trusting this woman? I don't know. I really don't know. But he finally relents, and on the 4th try, he finally tells her, he said, the source of my strength is in my hair. The razor's never touched my head. Of course, that was part of his Nazirite vow, and the razor would never touch his head. He said, if I lose my hair, my strength will be lost. So Delilah calls in a barber, shaves his hair. At night, Philistines attack. She cries out, Samson, Samson, the Philistines are here. He gets up, and he's not aware of what has happened to him. The strength has left him. The Spirit of the Lord has left him. The Philistines are able to come in and capture him. Delilah betrayed him, and Samson, for some reason, trusted this woman, and now he's in a lot of trouble. So they end up gouging out his eyes and capturing Samson. So it does say at the end of that little scene there, it says, Judges 16:22 says, however, the hair on his head began to grow after it had been shaven. It kind of gives you an idea of, well, if the strength was in his hair and his hair is growing back, it gives you the idea of he has repented. He has, went through what he needed to do to cleanse himself, basically. During his captivity, his hair started to grow. He's repented to the Lord, and the Lord is with him again. So the Philistines capture him. They take him away. Of course, they said they make him a grinder in the prison. He's got his eyes gouged out. He's blind now. The lords of the Philistines all gather. They're celebrating the capture of Samson, how their gods have delivered Samson into their hands. Of course, that wasn't what happened, but that's what they think has happened. They tell him, Samson, bring him from prison, let him dance before us, and so we can mock him. They bring Samson from the prison, and Samson says, I need to stable myself. Could you just put me between the 2 pillars of this temple? Because that's where this big ceremony was taking place, was a temple. So they put him in, lock him in chains right by the 2 pillars of the temple that were holding the whole place up. And one of the final things that Samson says, of course, what we talked about earlier, one of the final things that people say is very important. He says, "Oh Lord, just this once, be with me again, give me my strength back so I can kill these men." I mean, he has repented. He's asking for the Lord to restore him. And the Lord does. He gives him back his strength, and Samson's able to push down the pillars that are holding up the temple. It crushes, the temple collapses, crushes everybody inside. It says he killed more at that time than what he had in his entire life previous to that. So the collapse of the temple killed everybody inside. The Lord had restored him to basically to do that. So that was how Samson kind of ended up. He trusted Philistine women. They betrayed him, and trouble ensued. But in the end, he was faithful to God. God restored him, and he was able to do what he needed to do there. So that's kind of where we're going to stop there. Of course, another judge that we're going to talk about a little bit more next week, because next week we're going to talk about the establishment of the kingdom, of the king, I guess, kingship, establishment of a king in Saul. And to do that, we have to talk a little bit about Samuel. So we'll probably start off with a discussion about Samuel and his life and how it led into the establishment of the kingdom. So Samuel, of course, was the last judge of Israel. He was a very righteous man, very good man. He judged Israel in all the days of his life. And he warned the people about the perils of appointing a king, about what a king would do and what would be encompassed in having a king. But the people didn't listen to him. They didn't want God as their king anymore. They wanted a man to go out and fight their battles for them. And that's what they got, but not a very good man in Saul. So the book of Judges ends. The very last verse in the book of Judges, and again, this is one of our key things here. We want to make sure to look at how a book ends. The last verse in the book of Judges says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." How evil is that? When you do what's right in your own eyes, when you're not following the commands of God, when you're not looking after the things that God said were good and righteous and pure, you're not doing what God told you to do. Instead, you're kind of off doing your own little thing and not listening to what God said. It's kind of what we see today, isn't it? People kind of off doing their own thing, and we see all this evil in our world. And people wonder why there's evil in this world. It's because we don't focus on God. We don't do what God told us to do. We deny Him. We go off and do the things that I see nothing wrong with that. People are all the time do that. Eat, drink, and be merry. Of course, tomorrow is December the 21st. It's supposed to be the Mayan apocalypse, and everybody's all up in arms about that. And I was just reading an article this morning, because it's just now afternoon, reading an article this morning about people going out and partying and doing all this stuff and very immoral acts that they're wanting to do because, well, if tomorrow is the end of the world, you might as well have a good time tonight. Isn't that what's wrong with this world? Is people don't care anymore? They're not doing what God wants them to do. They're off satisfying their own desires and not doing what the Bible tells them to do. I think that's what's wrong here. So that's what we see at the end of the book of Judges too, is people are just doing whatever they feel like doing, whatever's right in their own eyes. If they think that this God, we should worship Him, well, they'll go worship Him for a while. Or, they want to go and kill somebody. Well, it's right in my eyes. I'm the God of my own universe. Might as well do what I want to do. No. There's a biblical standard we have to follow. And when we deviate from that, that's where we have our sin and our problems. So that's the lessons that we learn from this is God keeps His covenants and He has compassion. When we obey Him and do what we're told to do and are good servants, God is faithful to us. People are easily turned from their faith in God when they don't see, they're not able to see God acting in their lives, just like every second, and God was here and God was there and God was there, and if they stop seeing God, it's like, well, maybe God doesn't exist. Maybe I can do my own thing. People lose their faith in God, and then they have problems. But there is never a time when we go too far. People can be restored. All they have to do is repent. All they have to do is say, God exists. He sent His Son. He is my Savior. I can't do anything on my own. The Lord died for my sins. He is the only means through which I can have a relationship with the Father. He is my Savior. He is my Lord. Through faith, I am saved. That's where we need to get to. That's how we have that relationship with God. That's how we are restored. Faith in Jesus Christ. So that's where we're going to end it this week. Next week, or next session, hopefully I can do another one before next week. Next session, we will be dealing with the establishment of the kingdom. And then after that, the life of David. I think we'll break that into 2 sections. And then hopefully, that'll take us to the end of the year. So I hope you join us back here again next time. And until then, Merry Christmas. And God bless you all. So go out there, keep reading, keep studying, keep learning, and gosh, I hope you come back with some questions, and please contact us if there's anything that we can do to answer those questions. My website, of course, is www.CallUponTheLord.com. I encourage you to go visit us and grab your study guides and leave us a little bit of feedback. We're on Facebook. Go like us there, and follow us on Twitter. So, until next time, God bless you all. Have a good one.